for joining us on the Ramsey Consulting Services blog. We help small and mid-sized businesses simplify technology and stay secure so you can focus on growing your business. Today we're talking about constructive feedback. Let's get into it. Feedback is far more than a management tool. It is a cornerstone of professional growth and team development. Constructive feedback helps employees understand not only what they are doing well, but also where they have room to grow. When given thoughtfully, it fuels both personal development and organizational success. Research consistently shows that employees who receive regular, meaningful feedback are more engaged, more productive, and more likely to remain with their company. In today's competitive landscape, the ability to deliver constructive feedback effectively has become a critical leadership skill. The feedback fails, why we get it wrong. Even with the best intentions, feedback can go sideways. Many leaders use approaches that feel safe or familiar, but ultimately miss the mark. These missteps can leave employees confused, defensive, or disengaged. Understanding the most common pitfalls helps teams replace ineffective habits with practices that actually support growth. The sandwich method fallacy. A popular technique is the so-called sandwich method, where leaders layer criticism between two pieces of praise. The intention is to soften the blow, but it often backfires. Employees may focus only on the positive comments and miss the actual critique, or they may feel manipulated by the forced structure. Over time, the sandwich approach dilutes the impact of feedback and erodes trust. Conflict avoidance. Another common misstep is avoiding difficult conversations altogether. Many leaders believe silence prevents conflict, but in reality, it allows problems to fester. Unaddressed issues lead to declining performance, frustration among team members, and strained relationships. By sidestepping the uncomfortable moments, leaders inadvertently create bigger challenges down the line. Constructive criticism. Sometimes feedback is delivered harshly, without care or consideration, and then excused as constructive. In practice, this approach damages morale and increases the risk of turnover. Employees who feel attacked rather than supported are less likely to engage fully in their work or trust their leaders. Constructive feedback should never be a cover for careless communication. Feedback myths. Several myths also prevent feedback from being effective. One is the belief that feedback must always be formal. In truth, informal, timely feedback often carries more weight because it meets employees in the moment. Another myth is that only managers should provide feedback. Peer-to-peer insights are just as valuable, building collaboration and accountability across teams. Finally, there is the misconception that constructive feedback is always negative. At its best, feedback highlights strengths as well as opportunities, guiding growth rather than simply pointing out flaws. The art of delivering impactful feedback. The case for structured feedback. Feedback frameworks provide a reliable structure for conversations that might otherwise feel awkward or inconsistent. By using a framework, managers can reduce bias, improve clarity, and create a consistent experience for employees. Research supports the value of this approach. Gallup reports that 80% of employees who received meaningful feedback in the past week were fully engaged in their work. For small and mid-sized businesses, where managers often juggle multiple responsibilities and may not have formal HR training, frameworks become even more essential. They offer an easy-to-follow guide that keeps feedback both fair and constructive. As HR experts often note, structured methods help prevent feedback from drifting into vague or overly personal territory, instead keeping the focus on behaviors and outcomes. Situation behavior impact. The foundation. The situation behavior impact, or SBI model, developed by the Center for Creative Leadership, is one of the most widely recommended feedback frameworks. Its strength lies in simplicity. Describe the situation, explain the behavior observed, and outline the impact it had. Because it is grounded in observation rather than assumption, it minimizes the risk of misinterpretation. For example, in yesterday's meeting, the situation, you interrupted two colleagues, the behavior, which limited their ability to share input, the impact. SBI is especially effective in small business settings because it is quick to apply and easy to remember. However, it does have limitations as it does not explicitly guide managers to discuss solutions or future actions. Context, observation, impact, next steps. Expanding SBI. The context, observation, impact, next steps, or COIN model builds on SBI by adding a forward-looking element. Along with context, observation, and impact, it concludes with next steps, which encourages development and accountability. For example, on the last proposal, the context, your slide deck omitted key client metrics. The observation, which delayed our review. The impact, let's include a metric summary slide next time. The next steps. COIN is ideal for dynamic, project-driven environments because it balances corrective feedback with action planning. Research from Harvard Business Review shows that 72% of employees value timely corrective feedback for improving their performance, which aligns closely with COIN's emphasis on actionable outcomes. The trade-off is that it may require more preparation and thought compared to the simplicity of SBI. Balance, observed, objective, specific, timely. A checklist for fair feedback. Balanced, observed, objective, specific, timely, or boost serves as a practical checklist rather than a strict conversation script. Its purpose is to ensure that feedback is balanced, fact-based, objective, specific, and delivered at the right time. By following Boost, managers can avoid feedback that feels rushed, biased, or overly negative. For example, I noticed the support ticket lacked key solution details. Next time, include the root cause and resolution path to help the team respond faster. Boost is particularly helpful for training newer managers because it emphasizes fairness and consistency. It also reinforces credibility by encouraging a mix of positive reinforcement and constructive input. However, if used mechanically, it risks sounding formulaic instead of genuine. Research highlighted in Harvard Business Review underscores that feedback combining recognition of strengths with constructive guidance is significantly more effective at improving employee performance than feedback focused solely on weaknesses. Feed forward, keeping feedback future focused. Introduced by leadership coach Marshall Goldsmith, Feed Forward emphasizes guidance for the future rather than criticism of the past. This framework is designed to motivate growth and minimize defensiveness by shifting the focus away from mistakes. For example, instead of saying your presentation lacks structure, a manager might say, next time, open with 3 key takeaways to guide your audience. Feed Forward works well for development conversations where the goal is to encourage learning and improvement. Its strength is its motivational tone, but it does have a limitation. By focusing entirely on the future, it can sometimes skip over issues from the past that still need resolution. Describe, express, specify, consequences. Handling conflict in tight-knit teams. The describe, express, specify, consequences, or desk model was originally developed in the field of assertiveness training as a structured way to address conflict. It is especially useful in emotionally charged situations, which are common in smaller teams where relationships are close and tensions can escalate quickly. The framework involves describing the issue, expressing how it affects you, specifying what needs to change, and outlining the consequences if the behavior continues. For example, when you miss the deliverable, the description, I felt anxiety because it disrupted our schedule. The expression, please update me ahead of time if delays arise. The specifics, so we can realign responsibilities. The consequences, desk strength lies in its clarity and balance of emotion with action. It helps managers communicate concerns directly while also maintaining respect. However, it is not the best fit for everyday performance feedback and is better suited to conflict resolution. Data from CPP Incorporated shows that workplace conflict costs U.S. businesses approximately $359 billion annually, with employees spending an average of 2.8 hours per week managing disputes, highlighting the importance of frameworks like DESK. Which frameworks are best for SMBs? For small and mid-sized businesses, or SMBs, the most practical starting points are SBI, COIN, and boost as they balance usability, effectiveness, and scalability. Feed Forward is an excellent complement when focusing on employee growth, while Desk is a valuable tool for managing conflict in close-knit teams. Leaders do not need to master every model at once. Instead, starting with a foundational approach like SBI and gradually incorporating others as situations become more complex can create a flexible and effective feedback toolkit. Mastering the reception, how to truly hear feedback. Giving feedback gets plenty of attention, but receiving it well is just as critical to team development. Leaders who model healthy feedback reception set the tone for their teams. When feedback is handled defensively or dismissed outright, it not only undermines growth, but also discourages employees from speaking up in the future. By contrast, when feedback is welcomed, even when it stings, it builds a culture of trust and adaptability. The neuroscience of reception. Neuroscience provides insight into why receiving feedback can be so difficult. When we hear criticism, the brain often interprets it as a threat, activating the fight or flight response. As a result, people may react defensively, shut down, or even become combative. Compounding this challenge is a well-documented cognitive bias. Humans tend to remember negative comments more vividly and for longer than positive ones. This imbalance can distort the way feedback is processed. Recognizing these tendencies helps leaders and team members approach feedback with greater self-awareness and patience. Ask clarifying questions. A vital part of effective reception is making sure the feedback is clearly understood. Misinterpretations can easily escalate tension or leave the receiver addressing the wrong issue. Asking clarifying questions shows openness and a willingness to engage. For example, can you give me a specific example of when I did that? Or how would you prefer I handle this next time? These questions transform feedback into a two-way dialogue rather than a one-sided critique. The pause and process rule. One of the simplest yet most powerful techniques for receiving feedback is to pause before responding. Our natural instinct is to defend ourselves, explain away mistakes, or shift blame. Instead, a short pause to breathe, acknowledge the input, and consider what was said allows space for composure. This moment of restraint signals respect to the feedback giver and positions the receiver as someone who values growth. The thank you and reflect approach. Even when feedback feels uncomfortable or inaccurate, acknowledging the giver is an important step. A sincere thank you demonstrates humility and a growth mindset. While not every piece of feedback will be perfectly valid, there is often a kernel of truth worth reflecting on. By considering what aspects may hold value, even imperfect feedback becomes a tool for improvement. Team-level practices. Feedback culture strengthens when reception becomes proactive rather than reactive. A simple habit such as asking, "What's one thing I could do better next week?" normalizes the idea that feedback is expected and welcomed. Over time, this shifts team dynamics from fearing critique to seeking it out as a resource for growth. Building resilience. Ultimately, mastering reception requires building resilience. Constructive feedback should not be seen as a personal attack, but as a tool for learning. Teams that normalize this mindset become more agile, more innovative, and better prepared to handle challenges together. When leaders frame feedback as part of everyday growth, they create an environment where individuals feel supported, not scrutinized. Feedback in the hybrid world, new challenges, new solutions. As workplaces become increasingly hybrid, feedback delivery and reception face new challenges. Traditional in-person cues are often absent, and managers must adapt to ensure that feedback remains clear, actionable, and equitable across all team members. Research by the Society for Human Resource Management, or SHRM, shows that employees working from home often receive less performance feedback and recognition than their in-office peers, which can erode engagement, productivity, and even mental health. A Gartner study further indicates that remote employees are more likely to receive corrective feedback than praise, reinforcing the need for leaders to balance constructive guidance with meaningful acknowledgement. Navigating asynchronous feedback. Asynchronous feedback, delivered via email, chat, or document comments carries unique risks. Without tone, facial expressions, or immediate clarification, written messages can easily be misinterpreted. To reduce confusion, framing statements are critical. Simple cues like sharing this to help us improve on X, or here's a suggestion for next steps, help the recipient understand intent before diving into the details. Providing context with annotations or markups on documents or in collaborative workspaces further minimize misunderstandings. By clarifying intent and embedding context, asynchronous feedback can be as effective as live conversations. The power of video calls and clips. Video calls and short recorded feedback clips bridge the gap between asynchronous communication and in-person interactions. Nonverbal cues, tone of voice, facial expressions, and posture help convey nuance that written messages often miss. Short video clips can allow managers to provide feedback efficiently while maintaining a personal, human touch, as well as reinforcing clarity and connection across distributed teams. Proximity bias in hybrid teams. Hybrid work introduces proximity bias. Employees physically present in the office often receive more informal feedback and coaching opportunities than remote colleagues. Leaders must intentionally balance airtime and ensure remote team members receive equal attention. This includes scheduling one-on-one sessions, actively seeking input from remote contributors, and documenting feedback consistently to avoid favoritism or oversight. Psychological safety in virtual teams. Psychological safety remains critical in hybrid environments. Employees must feel comfortable speaking up without fear of retaliation or judgment. Leaders can foster safety by modeling vulnerability themselves, for instance, stating, "I'd like feedback on how I handled X." Simple micro-practices help normalize openness. Opening team meetings with a prompt such as, "One thing I'm working on improving this week," encourages everyone to share insights, demonstrates that growth is expected at all levels, and reduces fear of judgment. Over time, these small habits contribute to a culture where feedback is perceived as constructive rather than punitive. Building a constructive feedback culture beyond individual interactions. Creating a culture of constructive feedback goes far beyond individual conversations. In thriving organizations, feedback is woven into the fabric of daily work, supporting growth at both the individual and team level. For small and mid-sized businesses, cultivating this environment can increase engagement, retention, and overall performance. Regular check-ins and feedback cycles. Formal performance reviews are no longer sufficient to support development. Ongoing dialogue helps employees course-correct in real time and feel supported in their growth journey. Examples of effective practices include monthly pulse conversations, project postmortems, and start, stop, continue exercises. These recurring touchpoints reinforce the idea that feedback is an integral part of how work gets done, rather than an occasional administrative requirement. Encouraging peer-to-peer feedback. Feedback does not need to flow exclusively from managers to employees. Peer-to-peer feedback can be equally impactful when structured and encouraged. Organizations can create systems where team members feel comfortable providing constructive input to one another. Recognition programs can reinforce positive behaviors and encourage a cycle of ongoing, informal feedback that complements formal reviews. The leadership ripple effect. Leaders play a pivotal role in shaping feedback culture. Their actions, behaviors, and openness directly influence the norms within the organization. For instance, when CEOs or managers openly share feedback they have received and how they applied it, it signals to employees that growth is valued and that it is safe to speak up. Research from Gallup shows that in high turnover organizations, teams with strong employee engagement experience 21% lower turnover, while in low turnover organizations, the difference is even greater at 51%. This underscores how leadership modeling and a feedback-rich culture can drive measurable retention benefits. Feedback versus performance reviews. It is important to distinguish between constructive feedback and performance reviews. Feedback is ongoing, developmental, and actionable, helping employees improve continuously. Performance reviews, in contrast, are evaluative, periodic, and often tied to compensation decisions. One cannot replace the other. Feedback provides the continuous touchpoints that drive improvement, while reviews summarize performance over a defined period. Both are necessary but serve different purposes. Technology enablement. Technology can make continuous feedback easier and more consistent, particularly for hybrid or growing teams. SMB-friendly tools such as 15.5, Lattice, or Teams add-ins help structure check-ins, track goals, and facilitate peer-to-peer recognition. By leveraging technology, organizations ensure that feedback remains timely, documented, and actionable without overburdening managers. Feedback training. A feedback culture requires skill development at all levels. Role play exercises and workshops strengthen both giving and receiving feedback, making interactions more effective and less stressful. Research indicates that organizations implementing continuous feedback mechanisms report a 26% improvement in performance, underscoring the business value of deliberate skill building. Cross-cultural considerations. In increasingly global teams, cultural norms affect how feedback is perceived and delivered. Some cultures prefer direct, candid feedback, while others value indirect or more nuanced communication. Leaders should set clear expectations and provide guidance to ensure feedback is understood as intended, reducing the risk of miscommunication or unintended offense. The business value of getting feedback right. Effective feedback must receive attention and focus. It directly impacts key business outcomes. It shapes how teams operate, influences decision-making, and sets the stage for continuous improvement across all levels of the organization. By embedding feedback into everyday interactions, companies lay the foundation for sustainable growth and long-term success. Engagement and skill development. A robust feedback culture correlates strongly with higher employee engagement. Employees who receive timely, meaningful, and actionable feedback are more invested in their work, perform at higher levels, and experience greater job satisfaction. In addition, ongoing feedback accelerates skill development by helping employees understand what behaviors drive success and where improvements are needed. This continuous learning loop benefits both individuals and the organization as a whole. Collaboration and innovation. When feedback is normalized and delivered constructively, teams collaborate more effectively. Open communication fosters trust and encourages employees to share ideas without fear of judgment. This transparency fuels innovation, as team members feel empowered to suggest improvements, propose solutions, and take calculated risks in pursuit of organizational goals. Retention impact. Lack of feedback can be costly. According to the Work Institute's 2024 retention report, career remains the leading reason employees leave their jobs, with more than 17% of departures in 2023 tied to limited growth, development, or advancement opportunities. Since effective feedback is a key driver of career development, neglecting it can accelerate turnover. By contrast, organizations that prioritize regular, actionable feedback reduce attrition, preserve institutional knowledge, and maintain continuity in high-performing teams. Financial impact. The benefits of engagement extend directly to the bottom line. Gallup research indicates that engaged employees deliver up to 21% higher profitability than their less engaged peers. By fostering a feedback-rich environment, organizations not only improve employee satisfaction, but also generate tangible financial returns. In short, feedback is not merely a human resources exercise. It is a strategic lever for driving organizational performance, innovation, and long-term success. Leadership next steps. Creating a feedback-rich culture starts with leaders. The behaviors and priorities of those at the top set the tone for the entire organization. To embed feedback as a core part of team development, leaders can take several practical steps. Make feedback a standing agenda item. Incorporate feedback into regular team interactions rather than treating it as an occasional add-on. This could include dedicating time in weekly meetings for constructive input, or scheduling brief one-on-one check-ins focused solely on development. Making feedback routine signals its importance and helps normalize open communication. Model openness. Leaders should demonstrate receptivity by actively seeking feedback themselves. asking, "I'd like feedback on how I handled X," or "What's one thing I could do better as your manager?" shows humility and encourages team members to reciprocate. Modeling openness helps build psychological safety, which is essential for honest, productive dialogue. Ensure hybrid team feedback balances clarity with empathy. In hybrid or distributed teams, feedback must be clear, actionable, and considerate of the context. Leaders should leverage video, well framed written communication, and consistent follow ups to prevent misunderstandings and ensure all employees, whether remote or in office, feel included and supported. Invest in training and development. Constructive feedback skills can be learned and strengthened through training. Leaders should invest in workshops, role playing exercises, and programs that enhance emotional intelligence and communication skills. Equipping teams with these tools ensures that feedback is delivered and received effectively across all levels. Feedback as a cornerstone of growth. Constructive feedback is not a side activity or an administrative chore. It is the cornerstone of team growth and long term business success. When leaders prioritize feedback, model openness, and support skill development, they create an environment where employees feel valued, engaged, and motivated to perform at their best. In this way, feedback becomes a strategic lever that drives both individual growth and organizational performance. We hope you found this useful. For more insights on cybersecurity and business development, visit us anytime at ramseycs.net/blog. If you have questions about our services and how we can support your business, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks for listening and take care.